of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to give notice of an executive session that preceded the Board of Commissioners meeting this evening, and we discussed the personnel matter. Next on the item is the presentation from CARFAC.
Thank you, Commissioner Spengler. I'm Carl Bupp, and I'm chairman of the CARFAC. With me this evening from the CARFAC committee are Mark Blair, Jerry Linden, Laurent Chardonnay, and Ed Kane. Also, we have Lee Gourmand in the audience. We wanted to start by first thanking the commissioners for arranging this special meeting to learn more about the pension OPEB matter. We understand everybody's busy with the holidays, and we're appreciative of everyone taking their time to listen to what the CARFAC determined and learn more about this matter. We're going to start with a video presentation, and then after that, we'll turn it over to the commissioners, and you can take it from there. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, and welcome to the Citizens Audit Review and Financial Advisory Committee, otherwise known as CARFAC's presentation on the Pension and Post-Employment Obligations report to the Board of Commissioners. I'm Bill White. I have the pleasure of serving Radnor Township as the Finance Director, and I'm here tonight with members of the CARFAC, specifically the Planning Working Group, and we'll get to meet them here in a moment. We're also here with Mr. Bob Tate, who serves Radnor Township as the Assistant Finance Director. Before we get too far into this, CARFAC, in doing this project, also prepared a written report that was submitted to the Board of Commissioners and is now available online. So we recommend that interested parties go and read the written report in conjunction with this presentation, because the written report goes into a lot more detail in some of the areas. Before we get into meeting the individuals who are here with us tonight, I would like to mention that the champion of this project was unable to be with us tonight, Jim Bowes, but it was his efforts in the front end of this project that really gave it momentum and got all the parties together so that we could really dig into and learn a lot about this topic and really help the township get the ball rolling, so to speak. So Jim was not able to be there tonight, but it was his efforts really that brought this group together and got this report done and submitted. So we'd like to thank and recognize Jim for all his efforts. And someday when the township can say that they have managed these liabilities and are a much better financial spot, it's going to be because of Jim's efforts. So we thank him for that.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Carl Bupp, and I've been a resident of Radnor Township for over 12 years. I'm chairman of the CARFAC and have over 25 years of experience in financial operations and planning, including stints as chief financial officer for both a public and private company.
I'm Jerry Linden. I've been a resident of the Radnor Township for coming up on 20 years. And in addition to serving on CARFAC, I was also a member of the Citizens Budget and Advisory Committee, which preceded the CARFAC committee. I round out the group by bringing an information technology background with experience in financial information systems and other operational systems for many governments.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Mark Blair. My wife, daughters, and I have enjoyed living in the township these past 13 years. I'm a registered investment advisor. I work for Blair Wealth Management, and I'm a graduate of the Wharton School.
I'm Bob Tate, and I've had the privilege of serving as Radnor's Assistant Finance Director since May 1st of this year. I'm a CPA, and I've spent the majority of my career working in government and healthcare, and I've had the pleasure of being a part of this group and working with CARFAC on this very important project.
All right, so Mark, for those residents or those who are listening who might not know who CARFAC is, could you please describe who CARFAC is?
Sure, Bill. CARFAC stands for Citizens Audit Review and Financial Advisory Committee. The 8 volunteers all live in Radnor Township. In 2011, the commissioners appointed us after an interview process. 2 of the members of our team worked on the CB-FAC committee that Jerry mentioned earlier, and that's really helpful to have that continuity. Mostly we work with the township staff, you all, and the outside advisors, such as the actuarial firm. Our mission is to provide the board with independent financial advice and analysis, and to educate the public. CARFAC also serves as an informal audit review committee for the township. Our vision for the township is that it be regarded as on a sound financial footing, able to make and keep its promises, and have the financial flexibility to adjust to a changing environment.
Thank you, Mark. So why, when CARFAC was evaluating what projects to work on, why was this one so important to CARFAC? Why look at the township's pension and OPEB obligations?
Why OPEB? We noticed a $54 million unfunded OPEB liability on the township's 2011 financial reports. That's a huge number. For example, that's 87% of all the assets owned by the township. That would also be 164% of everything that the township spent last year. The kicker was that we learned that to fully fund the annual required contribution would require a tax increase of 22.5%. We decided we wanted to learn more about this large and growing liability.
Very good. Now, who is CARFAC trying to reach with this presentation? Who is your target audience?
Ultimately, it's up to the commissioners to resolve this. The townspeople and the employees need to know about it as well, because they'll be affected by the decisions that our leaders make.
Very good, Mark. Thank you. One more question for you, and that is, what is CARFAC's goal with this presentation? What are you hoping the messages that folks walk away with?
We are here to sound the warning bell. We certainly want to address the questions of the commissioners. We also want to inform the employees and the townspeople. We want to help everyone understand the long-term consequences of this.
All right, switching gears over to you, Mr. Tate. Knowing that this issue didn't crop up overnight, the township didn't get here overnight, just if you wouldn't mind, provide us a little bit of insight on maybe how the township got here.
Bill, that's a great question. To put it in context, there are retirees who started their career with the township back in the 1940s and 50s. They worked for a period of time, and they've been retired, receiving their pension and health care benefits for over 35 years. So the promises and commitments to provide for health care in retirement go back many years. It's a tremendous benefit, and that was the model for many years for public service employees. The problem, primarily with respect to OPEB, is that the long-term cost to provide for and to fulfill those promises and commitments to our employees and our retirees was never fully measured, estimated, accounted for, nor properly funded. And in fairness, there was no requirement to do so at any time prior to 2008. In the financial statements for Radnor Township in the past, the statement showed health care premium cost for that current year, and it broke it out between active, and it showed a portion for the retirees. It's only been since 2008, as a result of a change in financial reporting standards, has this liability been estimated, accounted for, and fully disclosed in the financial statements of the township. As the rate of increase in insurance premiums continues to outpace the rate of inflation each year, it becomes more important to address and develop a plan for funding this obligation.
As an introduction to the presentation that we're about to transition to, I just wanted to point out from the administration's point of view that the township is required to report its total liabilities in our annual financial report. Those reports are available on the township's website under the finance reporting and budget page. So you can always go to that page if you want to try to find those reports. As we step into this and transition to the slideshow, I'd like to make a summary comment on some of the bigger numbers, which we'll do now. I wanted to briefly touch on this item before we get too deep into the presentation. The unfunded pension amount comes directly from our 2011 financial report at $22 million. So this was calculated by actuarial professionals and ties directly back to our financial report. More importantly, what I really wanted to focus on here was with regard to the unfunded OPEB liability, which is shown on this slide at $214 million. The $214 million represents the amount of cash needed to pay for providing post-employment health benefits over the next 30 years. This is different than the amount shown in the annual financial report, which is calculated by actuaries based on a different set of criteria that are unrealistic to Radnor's situation. The primary unrealistic difference is that the actuaries assume that Radnor has dedicated assets to offset the liability, which is not true at this time. As a result, while accurate from an accounting sense, the amount of the OPEB liability reported in the financial statements at $54 million is artificially low. So CARFAC, in its election to put this information together and report it, elected to use the $214 million, which is a more accurate representation of the liability. So now, let's go to the CARFAX portion of the presentation on pension and OPEB liabilities. We're going to start off with Jerry, who's going to talk a little bit about the pension problem.
Thanks, Bill. Well, to start, something the public may not know is that in Pennsylvania, each local government creates and manages its own pension plans. This is different than in many other states where the state manages a combined plan for all local government employees, similar to what the state of Pennsylvania does for the local school districts. Radnor Township maintains two plans, one for police employees and one for civilian employees. These are structured as defined benefit plans, where the retirement benefit is determined based on some pre-established criteria, such as final average salary and years of service, and not by available funding. This can be contrasted with a defined contribution plan, where amounts are set aside during employment and the benefit is determined based on how much funds have been accumulated. The 401k plan that many in the private sector are more familiar with is an example of a defined contribution plan. Another important piece of background is that Radnor Township has three employee groups. Two employee groups are unionized, the police, represented by the Delaware County Fraternal Order of Police, or FOP, and civilian employees represented by RATE, the Radnor Association of Township Employees. The third group is administrative employees who are not unionized. Any changes to pension plans and benefits, along with salary and other work provisions for union employees, must be made through collective bargaining. In addition, any changes to benefits are subject to specific state law regarding pensions, as well as general employment and contract law. So now let's take a look at how the plans work. In the course of our project, we work with several of the township's outside professionals. This chart was prepared by the township's actuary, Mockenhaupt Benefits, to illustrate how the pension plan works for one employee. First, we'll look at an employee in the civilian plan. Starting at the bottom left, a new employee is hired at a salary of $50,000. Based on the current actuarial review of the plan, the actuary has determined what is called the normal cost of the plan, and based on that has determined that 13% of each current employee's salary should be contributed to the plan, or in the case of this employee, $6,500. That amount is funded from three sources. Civilian employees contribute 5% of salary, or in this case, $2,500. The state of Pennsylvania provides financial support to local government pension plans, and currently that is about $3,200 per civilian employee. That leaves Radnor Township to fund the balance, or $800 a year, a very manageable amount. So as we move up the chart over the 30 years until the employee retires, the employee in the township, along with state support, continue to contribute each year's normal cost to the plan. For our new employee, this is actuarially projected to be just over $400,000 in contributions, but with investment earnings will have grown to over $1.1 million when the employee reaches the normal retirement age in 2042. Our employee does indeed retire in this state and begins to collect his retirement benefit, which is 50% of his final average salary at retirement. This is projected to be just over $8,000 per month. It should be noted that this is in 2042 dollars, which would be equivalent to about $3,200 today. It should also be noted that the plan has no cost of living or COLA adjustment, so that the dollar amount will be fixed through retirement and will lose value over time. The employee, now retiree, would be projected to receive that benefit for 24 years, collecting a total of over $2.3 million. Let's look at an illustration for an employee in the police plan. There are several differences in the police plan, recognizing the different demands and benefit needs of a public safety officer. The main differences are a normal retirement age of 50, a disability benefit, and some differences in survivor benefits. Based on these differences, the actuary has calculated an 18.5% of salary normal cost. So for a new police employee hired at a salary of $60,672, the first year normal cost is $11,241. Like the civilian plan, the cost is shared between the employee, the township, and state support. The police plan has a lower employee contribution rate than the civilian plan, and the state contribution per police employee is actually double the civilian amount. The net amount for the township to contribute in this case is $24.18, higher than the civilian amount, but still quite manageable. Compared with the civilian plan, there are less years as an employee to contribute to the plan and a slightly larger amount required at retirement to fund a longer time of retirement due to the normal retirement age of 50. So next, let's look at the cost to the township of providing these benefits across all employees and how the costs, which were initially thought to be manageable, grew. As mentioned earlier, the township provides defined benefit pension plans. The benefit is fixed, so the township bears all the risks that the earlier actuarial assumptions were realized. Following state law, a periodic actuarial evaluations were completed earlier this year and reflect the status of the plans on January 1st, 2011. The best summary of the financial health of the plans is the funded ratio, or what is the percentage of funds in the plan as required to fund the projected liabilities, with 100% being a fully funded plan. As you can see, our plans were funded at 94% and 82% as recently as 2007, but are now funded at 67% and 57%. The initial assumption may be that this is just due to poor market returns over these 4 years. However, Radnor's funding status is much worse than most other Pennsylvania local governments. The State Public Employee Retirement Commission collects and summarizes all of the actuarial reports and categorizes them into what are called distress levels, how they are classified. Radnor's 2011 valuation placed us in the second distress level, or moderately distressed, and put us in the lowest 11% of plans across the state. Our CARFAX subcommittee worked with Township administration and our outside professionals to better understand the problem and develop recommendations. Certainly, recent market performance is a major factor, and this last valuation, the Township for future investment returns. Fully explain our funding status when compared with other local governments. What we did identify were an accumulation of benefit changes that are being amortized over time, such as an early retirement benefit in 2007, cases of deviations in the computation of final average salary from what had been projected, and deviations in what the actuaries refer to as experience, such as a greater number of disability retirements than what would be normal experience. Because each local government maintains its own plan, as described earlier, we are subject to more volatility since the risks are spread over a very small pool of employees. To make up for the funding shortfall, the actuary computes what is called the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or UAAL. This amount is then amortized over a period of time, typically 15 to 20. Now let's look at how the funding issues in our plans impact the township budget and our taxes. The annual amortization payment just discussed is now almost $2.5 million. It's important to note that the underfunding applies to both current employees and current retirees. So it's not just covering the future costs for the 130 current employees in the plan, but also the 116 former employees who are now retirees. If you divide the total amount by the 246 plan members, actuarial reports and categorizes them into what are called distress levels, with the table on the bottom right of this chart showing how they are classified. Radnor's 2000. The net amount for the township to contribute in this case is $24.18, higher than the civilian amount, but still quite manageable.
All right, just real quick, since we had a little bit of technical fun there, we're going to try again since it seems to be working now. If it pauses or if it hiccups again, we'll just try running it through my computer here. And I apologize for that. So that's a first-time error that we've had with this. So, Jim, go ahead and give it a shot one more time here. And we also backed it up to approximately where it started.
Contribute to the plan and a slightly larger amount required at retirement to fund a longer time of retirement due to the normal retirement age of 50. So next, let's look at the cost to the township of providing these benefits across all employees and how the costs, which were initially thought to be manageable, grew. As mentioned earlier, the township provides defined benefit pension plans. The benefit is fixed, so the township bears all the risks that the earlier actuarial assumptions were realized. Following state law, a periodic actuarial evaluation of each plan is performed. The last valuations were completed earlier this year and reflect the status of the plans on January 1st, 2011. The best summary of the financial health of the plans is the funded ratio, or what is the percentage of funds in the plan as required to fund the projected liabilities, with 100% being a fully funded plan. As you can see, our plans were funded at 94 and 82% as recently as 2007, but are now funded at 67 and 57%. The initial assumption may be that this is just due to poor market returns over these 4 years. However, Radnor's funding status is much worse than most other Pennsylvania local governments. The State Public Employee Retirement Commission collects and summarizes all of the actuarial reports and categorizes them into what are called distress levels, with the table on the bottom right of this chart showing how they are classified. Radnor's 2011 valuation placed us in the second distress level, or moderately distressed, and put us in the lowest 11% of plans across the state. Our Carfax subcommittee worked with Township administration and our outside professionals to better understand the problem and develop recommendations. Certainly, recent market performance is a major factor, and this last valuation, the Township lowered the assumption for future investment returns. But this does not fully explain our funding status when compared with other local governments. What we did identify were an accumulation of benefit changes that are being amortized over time, such as an early retirement benefit in 2007, cases of deviations in the computation of final average salary from what had been projected, and deviations in what the actuaries refer to as experience, such as a greater number of disability retirements than what would be normal experience. Because each local government maintains its own plan, as described earlier, we are subject to more volatility since the risks are spread over a very small pool of employees. To make up for the funding shortfall, the actuary computes what is called the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or UAAL. This amount is then amortized over a period of time, typically 15 to 20 years. Now let's look at how the funding issues in our plans impact the township budget and our taxes. The annual amortization payment just discussed is now almost $2.5 million. It's important to note that the underfunding applies to both current employees and current retirees. So it's not just covering the future costs for the 130 current employees in the plan, but also the 116 former employees who are now retirees. If you divide the total amount by the 246 plan members, that's an annual cost of just over $10,000 per member. And unlike the normal cost previously mentioned, it is not shared with the state or employee, but is totally borne by the township. So the township's expected cost to fund pensions, which should have been $446,569, is instead now almost $3 million, and a substantial part of the township budget. As you can see from the top of the chart, this cost has risen rapidly, and just the increase from our 2012 to 2013 budget of $1.4 million, if covered fully by the real estate tax, would have necessitated a 12% tax increase. The only reason that this is not occurring is that it was offset by increases in business taxes and by expense reductions.
Thank you, Jerry. What would you say are the three most critical points that you want the listeners to take away from that analysis?
Well, first, our pension liabilities present a significant challenge to our current and future budgets. Second, it's not just the market. Radnor's plans are in the lowest 11% of plans across the state. And third, if you remember back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, any changes need to be made through the collective bargaining process for union employees.
Thanks again, Jerry, and that's actually an excellent segue into the next portion of the presentation, which will cover the committee's analysis on the potential plan changes. Carl, if you wouldn't mind, how about you take us through that, please?
Thanks, Bill. As a first step in analyzing potential plan changes, we worked with Radnor staff and our outside professionals to conduct a market assessment of how Radnor's plans compared with other townships. We want to cover some of the most significant items. First, we looked at the employee contribution rate for police pension plans. The most common rate is 5% of salary. However, Radnor police officers contribute at a 2% rate, with an additional 1% paid by a charitable fund drive conducted by the Fraternal Order of Police, in which donations are made by Radnor residents and businesses. Less than 5% of the plans we surveyed had an employee contribution rate of 2% or less. Next, we looked at what is included in the computation of final average salary. which was mentioned earlier as one of the issues with our funding status. There are provisions in the Radnor collective bargaining agreements that allow employees to accrue unused vacation, personal, and compensatory time, and at the end of their employment with Radnor Township, receive a lump sum payout of this unused time. The issue from a pension perspective is that this one-time payout is included in the computation of the final average salary, which is the compensation averaged over the last 36 months of employment. This causes what is referred to as a spike in compensation. And remember, this compensation is used to determine the monthly retirement benefit for life. In our survey, Radnor was among only 4% of townships where unused vacation, personal, and compensatory time is used in the retirement benefit calculation. Further, Radnor's pension plans are audited by the Pennsylvania Auditor General to qualify to receive state pension aid. Radnor has been cited in those audits for this practice of including the lump sum payout of unused accrued leave time to calculate retirement benefits, which is considered illegal by the Pennsylvania Auditor General. As mentioned earlier, the police plan includes a disability benefit. Our survey identified differences in the level of this benefit. Again, the normal disability benefit is 50%, which is also the level of the disability benefit for the majority of other plans. Radnor's higher disability benefit rate of 70% is only offered by 8% of the plans we surveyed. Similarly, we examined the level of the survivor benefit and found that Radnor is in the minority of plans which provide a 100% survivor benefit. To sum this up, CARFAC recommends 3 primary considerations to manage these long-term obligations. First, bring benefit levels in line with market. Radnor is in a positive position where changes can be made to bring the costs down, yet still provide competitive benefits. Second, increase employee contributions to be in line with market. This will help offset a portion of the township costs, bring more buy-in from the beneficiaries of the program while still offering in-market benefits. And third, consider long-term strategies to convert from defined benefit to defined contribution plans. Many private sector companies have moved in this direction to contain costs while still offering a retirement package for their employees. Perhaps public sector employers should consider this same approach. Please refer to the written Township Pension and OPEB Obligations Memorandum to the Board of Commissioners for more details.
Thank you, Carl. How would you say could the Township's constituents best use the information in that segment?
The committee felt that the true current and future cost of benefits had not been fully understood. We felt that it was important to have those costs computed and available to the public.
Thank you again, Carl. Now let's transition over to the second major issue that we wanted to take a look at tonight, and that's called our OPEB, or Post-Employment Obligations Liability. Jerry, how about we start again with you with that analysis?
Thanks, Bill. As you mentioned before, at $214 million, the OPEB liability is much, much bigger. Let's take a look at why. First, let me explain what OPEB is. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. The other means other than pensions. The main other benefit is retiree health care. Radnor provides health insurance for its unionized employees after retirement and fully pays the insurance premium. Radnor provided a similar benefit for non-union employees, but only for those who were hired before January 1st, 1990. There is also a very small component of OPEB for life insurance. No funds have been set aside while an employee was active to pay for those costs during retirement. This is called pay-as-you-go, so that the taxpayers who benefited from the services of today's retirees were relying on future taxpayers to pay the retirees' health care. Likewise, we're relying on future taxpayers to pay the retirement health care costs of current employees. There is no law requiring that these future benefits be funded currently, and as Bob mentioned in the introduction, only since 2008 has there been an accounting requirement to compute and report this liability. Now let's take a look again at the life cycle charts. This illustration shows the pay-as-you-go model with the same new hire police officer we looked at earlier. There are no funds set aside during the officer's 25-year career, from 2012 to 2037. However, to be eligible for retirement health care benefits, the officer must stay employed by Radnor Township until normal retirement in 2037 or disability retirement. leaving employment with the township before retirement would totally forfeit this benefit. Once retired, the former officer, spouse, and dependents are provided with comprehensive health care coverage according to the plan in place at the time of the officer's retirement. The actuarially projected costs are shown on the chart, again in future dollars. But unlike the pension, where the dollar amount of the benefit is fixed for life, the cost of providing retirement health care will grow over time at the rate of health care inflation. One change does occur at age 65 when the retiree is required to enroll in Medicare and Radnor's plan becomes secondary. The insurance premium costs drop substantially, but are still not immaterial. As shown in the chart, the expected cost in future dollars for this one employee and his or her dependents is projected to be over $6 million. This is why the liability for OPEB is so large. Now let's look at how, actuarially, this liability would be funded during employment. To fund this benefit during employment, $1.8 million would need to be accumulated for this one officer by 2037, which would require $26,674 per year for 25 years to be put into a fund, which would also receive investment returns. No further contributions would be required by the township after retirement. However, the township would retain the risk that this projected funding was insufficient and would possibly need to supplement these funds in that case. As seen in the pensions illustrations, that cost could be substantial. Next, let's look at a civilian example. The model is the same, but there are a few differences that have very large cost impacts. First, the civilian employee cannot retire until age 62 versus 50 for the police officer. This means there are only 3 of those very expensive years until age 65 when Medicare comes into play, not 15 years. Second, only the employee and not spouse or dependents are covered for those civilian employees hired after January 1st, 1990. Third, the funding contribution is done over 30 years. Taking all those factors into account yields an annual payment of $6,990. So, as we did before, let's look at the costs of this benefit to the township in total and the impact on the budget and taxes. The red line illustrates the pay-as-you-go model, but with one very important note. This is the projected cost, but only considering those already retired or employed by the township today, or more specifically, as of January 1st, 2012, the date of the last actuarial valuation. If future employees were included, the red line would just continue to grow off the chart. And as you can see, under our current funding model, OPEB costs will rise significantly over the next 25 years. Now let's look at the pre-funding model as shown on the green line. Because funds have not been set aside to date, and the illustrations we just looked at gave you an idea of the amounts that actuarially should have been set aside, there is an unfunded liability of $53 million. There is no way the township could come up with $53 million today, so an amortization of that cost over 30 years is computed. On top of that is another normal cost, or putting aside funds annually, as we saw in the life cycle illustrations, but only for today's employees, again, not for future hires. Following the green line shows an immediate huge increase in OPEB costs, which would then gradually diminish over 30 years, and then at that point be fully funded, as long as all the actuarial assumptions held, and again, only for current employees and retirees. Under the pay-as-you-go model, which we're following today, the 2013 budget includes $1.8 million to pay retiree health care premiums for the 95 retirees receiving coverage. To put this in perspective, this is equivalent to 15% of the total tax collected in real estate tax. To switch to the pre-funded model would require an immediate incremental cost of $2.8 million, which is equivalent to an immediate tax increase of 24%.
Thanks again, Jerry. Now we'll have Carl take a look at the market comparisons that the CARFAC did as part of this project relative to the post-employment benefits segment.
Thanks, Bill. Similar to looking at the pension problem, CARFAC worked with Radnor staff and our outside professionals to conduct a market assessment of how Radnor's post-employment health care plans compared with other townships. The most significant items are the following. First, since post-employment health care is not regulated by the state as pensions are, obtaining market analysis is more cumbersome and the results are more varied. To help overcome this issue, the committee used information from the Delaware Valley Health Insurance Trust, in which Radnor Township participates to purchase health care for its active and retired employees. The Health Trust includes 91 public entities, which cover nearly 10,000 employees and their dependents. This provides an excellent representation of the greater Philadelphia public employee health care market. To start, we asked the Health Insurance Trust to provide a market analysis of the number of members who offer post-employment health care. As noted in the pie chart, Radnor Township is only one of the 9% of members who offer post-employment health care to both police and civilian retirees, while 13% only offer it to police and 78% do not offer any post-employment health care benefits at all. Then, we wanted to take a look at some of our neighboring communities as well as other similarly sized communities in the area to see how Radnor compared in terms of the magnitude of their unfunded liabilities. Again, as noted by the actuarial unfunded liability comparison bar chart, Radnor, with over $50 million in unfunded post-retirement health care liabilities, is carrying the highest unfunded obligation of those communities surveyed, with several of the communities having no post-employment health care obligation liabilities. This speaks to two areas of concern that should be analyzed and addressed by Radnor Township. First, Radnor's post-employment health care benefits are far more generous than other townships. We know this to be true already based upon the 78% of communities who don't offer any post-employment health care. Second, that Radnor Township has little to no dedicated savings set aside for the purpose of funding this obligation. While there are many changes to consider in managing this liability, CARFAC has narrowed its recommendations down to these three key considerations. First, limit the benefit to only include the years between retirement and Medicare age, currently 65. As people live longer and longer, the cost to provide health care is growing exponentially. This adjustment would still provide health care to retirees while limiting the township's long-term exposure. Second, limit coverage to the retiree only and require retirees to purchase additional coverage for dependents and spouses if needed. And third, require contribution from employees to offset the costs. Similar to pensions, employee contributions would help offset a portion of the township expense while bringing employee buy-in to the program. Please refer to the written Township Pension and OPEB Obligations memo to the Board of Commissioners for more details. Finally, to wrap up the presentation, CARFAC wanted to provide the Board with some immediate actions to consider, a couple of which we understand that the Board has already implemented. 1. Continue hiring freeze. As discussed in this presentation, and since hiring an employee today immediately obligates the Township to a 60 to 70-year commitment, the Township should work with the unionized employees and bring the benefit structure and associated expense obligations more in line with market levels. 2. Continue to audit retiree benefits. It came to the CARFAC's attention that for a period of time, the Township was not actively auditing the payout of benefits, which resulted in the Township overpaying for health care, pension benefits, and other items. Benefit management must be tightly controlled by the Township to ensure that the Township is only paying for what is required and appropriate. Third, convert retirees to present-day health plan. As noted, currently retirees are locked in to the health plan as it existed at the time of their retirement. Consequently, the Township is now managing approximately 20 different health care plans, many of which have benefit structures that are very costly, including plans with no copays and no deductibles. Analysis with the Health Insurance Trust suggests that significant annual savings could be obtained by negotiating an agreement with current retirees to bring them all into the current active health care plan. Fourth, engage state reps. The Township is limited in what it can do to manage benefit levels as a result of state law, or the absence of state law as it pertains to post-retirement health care. CARFAC is recommending that the Township advocate to its representatives to press for change at the state level that will allow municipalities to better manage pension and post-employment health care. This is most critical as it pertains to police pension benefits. Provide ongoing commissioner, employee, and citizen education. As we noted earlier, Part of the reason the Township is in this position is due to the lack of full understanding and disclosure of the costs associated with benefits being promised to Township employees. The Township has come a long way in the past 24 months in terms of bringing these issues to light, beginning with the work of the CBFAC in 2010, the public meetings dedicated to this topic in February and May of 2012, and now this CARFAC presentation and report in late 2012. However, the Township must continue to provide education for the Commissioners, employees, and citizens on the implication of contract decisions and the short and long-term financial impacts of those decisions.
All right, thank you, Carl. So now let's bring back all of the CARFAC members into the discussion. When we first started the presentation, we mentioned that the primary audiences we were trying to reach included the Board of Commissioners, the employees, and the residents. And that the goals of the presentation included making sure that we answered the board's questions and also to foster public conversation and education on the topic. So as we wrap up, what are the most critical points that you're hoping to leave the listeners with today?
Well, because of a combination of demographic and economic factors, the cost of providing these benefits has now become a substantial and largely uncontrollable component of the Township's budget, and they're projected to grow exponentially. So it's critical to put a plan in place now that is sustainable and satisfies all the Township's stakeholders. Since 2007, the percentage of employee benefits to total expenses has grown from 16% to 24% in 2013. Further, these percentages only include OPEB at the pay-as-you-go amount, which is millions short of fully funding that obligation. At this rate, it won't be long before Radnor risks having to cut essential services in order to pay for these benefit obligations.
We will be forced to deal with this in the future. CARFAC thinks it's better to begin making adjustments now while we still have flexibility.
One of Radnor's greatest assets is the financial strength of the Township, which allows the Township to provide a level of services that makes this a place where people want to live. We want to address these unfunded liabilities and manage their growth in a thoughtful manner to ensure the long-term viability of this great community.
Very good. Mark, one final question for you, and just to touch on the urgency aspect of this. Why the urgency from CARFAC with the presentation and this information? Why is it important to get this out right now?
2013 could be a momentous year for our Township. Issues too pressing to ignore will demand our attention. There are opportunities to redesign that will improve our condition. If left unchecked, though, the pension and OPEB liabilities will crowd out essential services in the future. Next year, the Township could begin to make adjustments that would begin to cut back on those liabilities or cut back on the growth rate of it. The good news is that we are becoming aware of this predicament. The commissioners are acting. People are talking. Together, we will resolve this. Thank you.
On behalf of the Township administration, I'd like to take a moment to thank Jim Bose, who was unable to be with us tonight for the presentation, but as I mentioned at the beginning, is really the champion behind this report and the driving force behind getting it done, as well as Jerry and Mark, who participated heavily in I forget how many meetings, but the number of hours were pretty remarkable through the summer months as we put this information together. And then for Carl, too, for his input with this presentation as well as guidance throughout the entire project. I continue to be impressed and amazed at the amount of dedicated time that these volunteer individuals put into assisting the Township the way they do, and they should be thanked for that. At the same time, I'd also like to thank Bob Tate and Ben Cooper from the Finance Department, who also spent a considerable amount of time this summer reaching out to other municipalities, getting information on their benefit structures, all in an effort to try to put this report together. So the amount of time and energy that they put into this should be commended as well, and I'd like to thank them. This concludes the presentation part of our taping. I would again like to reiterate that there's a written report that the CARFAC put together and submitted to the Board of Commissioners that's also available on the Township's website and it goes into much greater detail. So I would recommend reviewing the written report in conjunction with this presentation. And I'd like to thank you, the residents, and the Board of Commissioners, as always, for the opportunity to serve Radnor Township. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We certainly appreciate all the effort you put into this, and it's very simple for me. I get it, I got it, and my future decisions will be based on this information. Thank you. Any other commissioner comment?
Yeah, I have some questions. Well, first of all, thank you. This is the report. Tonight's presentation, but especially the report, is enormously helpful in detail, and especially seeing the market analysis. I know that was a lot of work to do, but it is so helpful to make these decisions and assessments not in a vacuum, in context of what the reality is in the rest of our region. A couple of things occurred to me. I have to admit, I am not up to speed on where Pennsylvania is in terms of the state exchange that's going to be, or the state pool that might occur under the new health care law. And I'm wondering, does anybody have any idea of where that is, and if that would have any effect on our future plans?
Yeah, I mean, without going into details of that, which I don't have any more information on than you do, but I think the key thing to remember is that my understanding of it is that Radnor has guaranteed a level of benefit to retirees, and it's the level of benefit that was in place the day they retired. They are required to enroll in Medicare when they turn 65, but to the extent that Medicare, what Medicare provides decreases, then Radnor would need to continue to make up that greater difference. Likewise, if what's provided by Medicare increases, that would relieve Radnor of some of the burden. I would think, if anything, the discussions, as I interpret them, would say that the benefit of Medicare may decrease. So potentially, Radnor's on the hook to make up, a greater difference between those two plans.
So that could work against our favor. Okay. Another thing I wanted to ask about in the report, it didn't come up in this presentation, but one option that was briefly mentioned was, I guess for current retirees, was a buyout option. And I found that really intriguing. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that, what that would look like?
Sure. Well, I think the idea is that, it is pretty open in terms of what it could be. It would be something that would be negotiated individually with each retiree, but depending on a retiree and their particular situation, to the extent they have dependents covered and what they're covered with now, to the extent they may have other other sources of insurance, there could potentially be scenarios where there'd be something that would be more valuable to them in terms of some payment upfront. In lieu of that future benefit of the plan.
And then that would help us in our actuarial defined debt that we owe.
Right, and the concept would be...
Take that employee off the books.
Exactly, and there could be something where something up front now to a particular employee may be worth more, and so it's, a win-win. It's a benefit for the township, it's a benefit to the employee.
And is that something that's common, either in public or private pension plans or long-term disability plans?
Yeah, it's something we came up with in looking at what's going on, not just around other local governments, but even with some plans in different states. So, we don't really have the detailed analysis on how common it is, but it's certainly one of the options that you read about in, a number of reports as something to consider.
It just occurred to me when I saw it that, we're taking current cash dollars, we will be taking current cash dollars and setting them aside to control this long-term kind of undefined liability. Maybe it would be smarter to minimize our exposure by doing that in every case we could. Yeah, I guess you just have to see where the numbers fall out. But
right, certainly something to look at, and there's any number of permutations on how it could actually be done.
Okay. Well, I have some general comments that don't have anything to do with your presentation, so I'll make them very quickly. In watching this, and in having our public and our employees see this presentation, I think we all need to remember in the front of our heads that, we're talking about our employees, the people that are working hard for us and doing jobs that are invaluable, keeping us safe, keeping our sewers going, keeping our garbage collected. So it's important that we all remember the value of the work that these people are doing, and that it's not perceived that we're trying to balance our budget on the backs of these workers. That's not the case at all. And I think we all on this board really want to pay and to give benefits to our employees to the extent that we, as generously as we can afford it. And therein lies the problem. We've been giving more generously than we can afford. And as much as we would like to continue doing that, we just can't. And if we continue down this downward spiral without controlling these benefits that are promised in these contracts, we're going to end up in a position where either we have to cut our services and either not provide services and have the private market take over, or we're going to have 22% tax increases, which nobody is going to support, and public opinion is going to turn against having employees do this work instead of private enterprise. And nobody wants to get there. So I guess in the long run, the long and short of it is getting a handle on these costs and controlling them now is really to the benefit of our employees and the services that we provide at this point. Otherwise, they won't exist in 5 or 10 years. And it's, we're in the very unenviable position of having to cut benefits from our employees who we don't want to do that for. But we really have no choice, and the alternative is ending up in a place where we can't afford to employ those employees at all. And we have to keep that in mind. That's it.
Couple quick questions. Did you calculate the fully loaded cost for a new hire today and either under the police or civilian plans?
Yes, so some of that information was presented in those life cycle charts. Some of it shows what the cost is for the first year, and you would apply those percentages to their salary as it grows over time. It's important to understand the assumptions that are underneath those calculations. Also in the report itself, you'll see there's a chart that kind of shows all the benefits stacked up together, so that including some of the benefits we didn't talk about, and along with all the components of salary. So some of that information is available in the detailed report. But again, it's important to understand the assumptions that went under it and the risks around those assumptions. That just as we illustrated, for many years you can think you're saving the correct actuarial amount, but things can change and it can turn out not to be the correct amount.
Okay, thank you. You also, in your looking around, we only talk about this in terms of real estate tax. Did you look at any alternative taxing mechanisms?
Not particularly, and the reason we compared it with the real estate tax was under the concept that the other fees and taxes are fixed percentages, and they're based on a level of business activity or something, with the idea that the real estate tax is the thing that has to absorb any discrepancy or any increase, that it falls to that. So we thought between that and thinking that was also something that people could relate to was a way to compare it. But certainly there's other ways to fund things, and a lot of this, just as you saw in 2013, something like the business tax can come along and take away the necessity of a 12% increase.
The last item, as you were looking at this, the Pennsylvania system's in a huge amount of distress also. While that doesn't affect us, it affects our taxpayers in that the school district pension plans are through there. Do you have any idea of the magnitude of that in comparison? Yeah,
the plan covering the school district is really a whole different animal. It's pooled together across the state. The state makes essentially the shortfall is made up in a whole different way. It's made up by increasing the contribution rate for a period of time. So, my understanding of it is that PERS has set a set of rate increases, that has a big spike over time and comes back down, that the school district has made some provision for that, but it's really all combined at the state level, and it's really hard to see. So I think what's best is, the information about what PERS is requiring is available online through them, and as well as I believe some of the information about what the impact on the school district is. but it is very hard to make a comparison between the two because they're really entirely different plans.
Right, there was mention, Governor Corbett mentioned over the weekend that he's going to be coming forth with some specifics around the state pension plans. We'll have to see when that comes out, but certainly there's recognition at the state level, and that'll deal with a number of those plans, and perhaps that will help Radnor in dealing with some of these issues as well.
Yeah, talking to some of the school board members, they're talking numbers much more significant than we're talking about. Thank you, that's all I have.
Got a couple of questions. And the numbers assume no attrition, right? That the employees who are here today stay till their full retirement age? That nobody quits and is replaced by somebody else? Is that accurate?
That's correct, but it also does not consider new employees coming in to replace those that do retire.
I guess this question is more for John Rice. There was a comment made, if I heard it accurately, that this pension spiking, according to the Auditor General, is illegal. Is that an opinion of one person?
I would call it a finding. They issue findings, the things that are inconsistent with state law. I'm not aware of specifically what that is. Did they actually call it illegal? Probably not. They call it a finding, and it's something usually that it's either a benefit that was given that shouldn't have been given, or some other aspect of the pension plan that's inconsistent with, I guess, Act 600. And that's not unusual, Kevin.
I remember reading, I just wanted to, the wording is, you don't like to hear the word illegal.
It's not a felony. It's not a misdemeanor. It's a finding of inconsistency with state law.
Did you, I may have seen it, I didn't see it here. Do you have a breakdown? And Bill, if you don't have it handy, you can get it from me after the fact, of how much of this is attributable to currently retired employees versus who's on staff now?
Yeah, I think some of that's in the detailed report that we have, and then there's further information where you can get some of that breakdown in the actuarial reports that come from Mock and Hop.
Okay, is it in this report? Maybe I didn't pick it up.
To a certain level, it's in there, backed up, but and then to a certain degree that can be broken out. In certain aspects of it, it is pulled together. So it really goes back to what's in the actuarial reports.
Okay. My final question is for Bill. Are you planning to change how you budget for current new hires or current employees on staff based on the findings or recommendations of this report?
Yeah, I think from the administration's perspective, the short answer is absolutely, and we already started to do that. We go back to the decision that we made with community development relative to the property maintenance and the new the additional services we're doing there, where we elected to use a third-party company rather than hiring someone. That analysis, in terms of comparing the hourly rate, came directly from this report. So yes.
My question was a little bit more intended to be a little bit more direct than that. Are you planning, when we hire somebody, or even in future budgets, to put expenses in to account for their current these future benefits that aren't funded? I'm taking off, we've got baggage to deal with from the past that we'll have to deal with. I know we took an opportunity this year when we've had, higher than expected revenues from some of the business taxes and put it aside. But on an operational, ongoing basis, are we going to start seeing in future budgets something that says, $10,000 per year for the employee to kind of be set aside?
Yes. I'll answer directly, and it's yes. What you will see, and we started putting it in this budget, is the breakdown for each employee between what, as it was explained in the presentation, the normal cost and then the amortization of the unfunded piece. At a minimum, moving forward, anytime we hire someone, we should be putting aside the normal cost both for pension and, to the extent we still offer the benefit, OPEB.
Thank you to your group for the expertise and the effort. It's very, very valuable to all of us. So I have just two things to think about, or two additional things. One is I think we have to give some thought to protecting the, if we're going to create, which my sense is that we're going to create some kind of dedicated tax to solve this problem, among other things that we're going to do, but one of them would be some kind of dedicated tax. And my sense is we have to have a way of protecting it, because there are scenarios that could, so like imagine we create a dedicated tax, imagine it's all things in, we're $10 million toward this obligation, and then there are factors that could make our portion of that decrease, like our MMO could go down due to market forces. So we could also over-collect in other taxes. So it's very possible that a future board could stick with that $10 million and use that to satisfy its obligation, but we have this revenue stream that we created from a tax, and now that tax goes to purchase something else. So in the discussion of how we're going to, we've set up a process to protect the revenue once we've deposited, but I think we also have to set up a process to protect the stream of revenue, to protect the stream itself. So that's one thought. And then another thought is the idea of shifting the transfer tax. So my understanding of our transfer tax is that it's obligated to open space for circa 20 more years, or through 2032 plus or minus. But there comes a point in the future that as long as we don't buy more land, we can shift that tax away from paying debt on open space, and we could go to the voters and ask voter permission to shift that to something else.
It's 1/4% of the transfer tax, not the whole transfer tax.
I understand. Yeah. I'm just saying take that portion and shift it to these obligations.
Well, there's no sunset written into that.
No.
Yes, but there are obligations that we can't do that now, because we have to meet obligations from previous purchases.
Well, we
But
could do
well,
that
2
now and
decades-
just pay out of the general fund.
But in 2 decades, we will meet those obligations. So if we don't purchase more land, if we don't bond more land, we'll have flexibility in 2 decades that we don't have now. So that's what I think we have to think about. And then third, just for staff, the idea of specifics, obviously you're working on that, but specifics for how we're going to create these revenue streams into the funds that we've already created.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you to all the members of the CARFAC and also the CBFAC. I see some members here from that committee. I think it was about four and a half years ago, I had asked the former manager to show me the OPEB actuarial calculations, which were required under, I think it was I always get this wrong, either Act 50 or GASB, something or other. So we had this information, the prior administration had this information, and like many administrations, it was sat on. But I want to thank this administration for not sitting on it, and this board and these 2 committees for acting and getting this information in a very clear form. I mean, this is the clearest I've ever seen a report in terms of liabilities that are generally not well understood. And I'll just give some examples. I remember trying to make a decision whether or not to vote on hiring a police officer a few years ago. And, I used the public service math, assuming that it would cost around $120,000 to hire a police officer. I value our police officers. I think we need to hire police officers when we need to hire police officers. But now we realize that the true cost of hiring a police employee, if you include their current salary, their current benefits, and then the unfunded piece that we don't think about, all the future benefits they receive in both OPEB and their pension, it's $210,390. Same thing with the civilian union employees, the rate employees. The true cost of hiring a rate employee today is $120,866, and then the civilian non-union are $127,161. These numbers are huge, and if an elected board knew these numbers over the years, we would have been more cautious about hiring. We would have said, we would love to have 50 police officers, but we really can't afford 50 police officers. We're going to have to hire less than that. So whatever that number is, and I don't want to get into a debate of how many we should have or any of that, but the point is we understand the true costs now, and I really appreciate that. This has brought a huge amount of clarity to our role of trying to set policy for this township. And what I hope it does is prevents any future board from making any mistakes in terms of hiring and overhiring.
I have a lot of thoughts about this gap. I mean, we're looking at, and I probably don't have all the numbers in front of me, but basically about a 22.5% tax increase to begin funding this liability. In reality, I don't think this board or any board would want to vote on and approve a 22% tax increase. So I'm gonna hope that the union's representation and the workers that work for a township can come to the table and work with us as in a partnership and try to help us bridge this gap. I don't, to speak to Commissioner Schaefer's point, I don't think it would be fair to put this entirely on their backs or even expect them to come close to that. But in the end, I could really see this board having to increase taxes between 10 and 15% to bridge part of this gap. But we need some givebacks from the unions in order for us to make these gaps. I mean, really, if what we're talking about here is, if we don't fund these obligations, in other towns and cities across America, they're filing bankruptcy. That's not really an option here. I don't see that as an option for me. I see some people saying maybe it is an option. I really don't think it's a reasonable option. I think we have to run a township government. We can't run from all of our liabilities. We have to try to meet these liabilities the best we can. I want to just also mention that we really do need to look to our state and federal legislators because, for instance, I'll just give one example. This week they're talking about the fiscal cliff. They're talking about raising the retirement age from 65 to 67. That will have a dramatic impact on us in a negative way because we may have to bridge that gap further. Yet, I don't hear much discussion about national health care reform and getting that in some form. We also need pension law reform because obviously the state of Pennsylvania, I believe, I was looking at some of their numbers, their gap is in the billions of dollars per year. So billions, not millions, billions. And the reality is if they don't reform the state law, then we don't have any hope of getting any reforms that will affect us. So we're going to have to do the most we can to reach out to our state and federal representatives to get some change there. I agree with the recommendations from the committee on the pension. They have recommended that we bring the benefits, the pension benefits in line with what the market is receiving. They also recommend that the employee contribution increase and at some point try to move all of our employees from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. And that is pretty much what most of us understand in the public sector, private sector, that there's really no one that I know of at this point that's employed and has a pension. So I expect us to do a lot of hard work over the next couple of years on that. And then on the OPEB fix, it's very similar, but basically structuring those benefits so they cover only from retirement to the Medicare age. And again, if the Medicare age keeps going up, we have a bigger gap to fill. And also only covering the retiree, but allowing the spouse to get coverage if they pay for premiums. And getting higher contributions from current employees. Again, this partnership that I'm envisioning here is not just this Board of Commissioners trying to raise taxes 20 or 30% to try to bridge this gap, but relying on administration and relying on all the current employees to try to do their part to try to help us bridge the gap. There are other tools that we'll have at our disposal, but none of the other tools that we have. There's been in other towns I hear talk of outsourcing. That to me is not a good choice. That would be a last resort. That is not something I would support at this time. But I currently support the hiring freeze that we have in place. And I do like the idea of auditing the benefits. That clearly was an issue that we've seen over the last 2 years. And then trying to get the retirees to convert to the current health care plan, I think is a really good point. That doesn't come without some upfront costs, but we should consider doing that and trying to get some agreement from them. I think that's about all I have to say. But again, thank you to administration, Bob Zinkowski, Bill White, Bob Tate, and all the staff and directors and the committees for putting this information together. Because I think with this information, I feel that we caught ourselves before it was too late, and I feel that we have a chance to turn it around it's going to be painful for a lot of folks. I think we all have to feel a little bit of pain, but we have to recognize that the retirees that are collecting these benefits are what made Radnor the beautiful, great place that it is today, and the reason why many of us choose to move here and raise our kids here and families. So, it's important to recognize that investment of their lives to get us here. So we have to make sure we do the best we can for them, and of course all the current employees that are working for us now, and making sure we do the best for them. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, real quick, I feel compelled to apologize to you and to the members of CARFAC for our little technical glitch, and to assure everyone that the video itself is in good shape. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that the video is uploaded onto the website. That should be clean. And if anyone's interested, we can burn clean copies onto a DVD, similar to what we did with the budget document. Just let us know name and how to contact you, and we'll get you a DVD of it. So CARFAC put a lot of time and effort into making that video, so I apologize for the technical issues we had earlier.
Public comment?
Martin Heldring, 305 Audubon Avenue. I wanted to start by saying, as a taxpayer who's been coming to these meetings for a while, I also appreciated the report. I mentioned last time that the work the CARFAC committee has done has been spectacular, and this also is an excellent report. Several times there are references to a presentation. We saw the presentation today, and then this is what I picked up in advance. But that presentation is also available on the website that was up there? Now it will be? Okay, great. Just a couple of quick comments. I have to say, directionally, some of us have come up and spoken about this issue in the past. That can not come as any surprise to anyone. So directionally, I knew which way this was going. But I have to say, this is a much larger issue than I thought. I mean, I'm still trying. I haven't read the whole report because I just picked it up. But I'm still trying to get my head around $236 million in unfunded liabilities. And that's just sort of pension and OPEB. I don't think, I'm sitting on this stormwater committee where I think they're talking about $60 million in repairs and maintenance to a system that has been largely unaddressed for a number of years. I think there's been a couple of $1 million in the last 10, something like that. So you layer that on, and now you're up to $300 million. And I don't know what else is out there. So, I mean, $300 million, when this started 6 months ago, I think we were talking $70 million in unfunded liabilities, and now we're all up to $300 million. So that's one. When I go home tonight, my wife says, "How was this?" She's not a numbers person, but $300 million is one number I'm going to make sure she remembers. I was also struck. I knew we had overly generous benefits. I knew that. But the spiking issue and the extent to which our benefit packages are so much more generous than almost any standard you can apply. I think the standards are up here were other townships. But if you applied the standard against the private sector, there's nobody in the private sector that has those kind of benefits. So as a taxpayer, I walk away, that was news to me. That was more shocking than I would have expected. You mentioned to a degree the crowding out, and if we don't address this now, we're going to start crowding out other services. But I'd argue in the meetings that I've attended, the crowding out has already started. I've heard in several meetings about police officers. You don't have as many police officers as they would like. That's already crowding out. There's the huge hullabaloo on the Agnes Irwin field, right? Well, if you didn't have the crowding out issue, you never would have dealt with that. You would have just kept the field yourselves. You got the Willows thing going on. You got the stormwater issue. So there's a litany of things that are already being crowded out, and it's only going to get worse if you don't deal with it as soon as you can. So I had a few thoughts and recommendations. I heard in the presentation I talked about, I read or I saw a hiring freeze, but then I heard immediately people start talking about new hires. This problem is so severe that I don't know how the board could consider new hires in that kind of environment. It just has, in my view, it would have to be a dead stop until you figure out what this liability is and how you're going to deal with it. So that's number one. Number two, I think it was 18 months or so ago that you had a waste management study about whether or not you should keep it in-house or privatize it. And my guess is, I have to go back and look at it, but probably a component that was missing in that is this whole analysis embedded in it. And as I recall, it was roughly break even. You know, it was roughly economically the same keeping it in-house as putting it out. I didn't believe it at the time, but now with this information, it would have to swing wildly in the other direction. So I think in fairness and in transparency to the taxpayers, that study should be refreshed and brought back, and people should know what it looks like. Communication. Taxpayers, I've learned, tend to be a sleepy bunch, but they do eventually wake up. And numbers kind of overwhelm them. So communication, I mentioned it last time, you need to communicate this out. And you need to, I mean, this is a terrific report, particularly for people who are used to numbers, but a lot of people aren't. So I don't know how you're going to, there's got to be a way to effectively communicate this in a way that the person who's not familiar with numbers quickly grasps the magnitude of the issue.
And that is the purpose of the video that was produced.
Yeah,
to try to make it
that's
more.
What I thought was, and I thought that was great. But if you haven't gone to an economics class, you haven't gone to a finance class, you're not in that space. You know, again, I'm not picking on my wife. I hope she's not watching. But if she were watching that video, she would have tuned out and flipped to something else. So many numbers, so many charts. It's overwhelming. And so somehow, and I'm not being critical of it. I thought it was great. But for the broader tax base, synthesizing it, simpler, key points, big numbers. You know, this is just, it's too long. So I think CARFAC probably appreciates that. And then lastly, you know, it's a huge issue. It's not of all of your making. It's been, as others have said, in making for years. But it needs to be dealt with in a fair way, a fair and balanced way. And by that I mean, when you go to the taxpayers, I think it's very fair to say to a taxpayer, you ought to pay a fair price for the services that are being provided. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask them. I think in my mind, it's a little bit more difficult to come and say to that taxpayer, you ought to pay for a package of benefits unlike anything you yourself have or anything your neighbors have. I think that's very difficult. If you come to me and ask me to pay for that, I don't consider that fair. So on the one hand, fair and balanced means you got to go to the taxpayer with a fair package. They should be asked to pay a fair price for the services they get. I don't think they should pay for something that is uncompetitive and unrealistic in today's environment. And to the employees who've, you know, some of whom I assume have been working here for 30 years and have built this into their expectations, it also needs to be handled fairly with them. I think if you took them aside and said, is it fair that they have something that's so unrealistic relative to everybody else in the world today? I hope they would say it's probably not fair and they'd be willing to negotiate, but they have to hopefully understand that, and you have to go make this case to them. Otherwise, to your earlier point, Mr. Fisher, the only ways, if there is no resolution with the employees, to me, it's a little bit like saying to somebody, do you want a Mercedes, but I'm not going to give you the gas to pay for it. Because that's what it is. It's a Mercedes plan, but the township doesn't have the gas to pay for it in the long run, right? So who wants a Mercedes with no gas? Give me a Hyundai. But you need to, if you don't do this, if you don't deal with this in the very near future, what are your options? It's outsourcing, which brings employees down, or, and I'm not saying we're near bankruptcy, but you don't have to look very far around the landscape today to see a lot of places that have gone bankrupt. And that's the way they dealt with it, because they waited too long. So you do have a chance to deal with it, but you need to deal with it. Thank you.
Hi, Dan Webster, 242 Ravenscliff. Outstanding presentation. Thank you to the board for allowing them to do this, and for the staff and CARFAC especially for putting it together. I actually only have one comment, and I don't want to sound unappreciative because I'm very appreciative for what you did, but it sounds like one of the things that needs to be done here, the big issue is going to be the renegotiation of these agreements next year. And I just wonder if maybe a next step, they've probably already done it because they've done so much already, is to look at what the levers are in these contracts to see where the township would get the most benefit when you go to negotiate these contracts. Like, is changing the retirement age from 65 to 67 the biggest one, or is increasing the pension contribution from 2% to 5%? What's the relative impact of those, just so that when Bob goes in to have these negotiations, he understands where the biggest bang will come? Because I'm sure that stuff is, with all the actuarial calculations, is very complicated to figure out. But thank you.
Hi, Sarah Armstrong, Radnor resident, and chair of the 2010 CBFAC. And it is great to see that the work started with the CBFAC has been so competently managed by the CARFAC. Excellent, excellent job. Thank you to everyone for all of their hard work. And also glad to see that really the big issues are being tackled first. Agree with a lot of the earlier comments, but just had one quick thing to say. Commissioner Fisher, you thanked both groups, but both groups owe you a thank you, because without your tremendous efforts championing getting this thing up and running in 2010, neither of these groups would exist. So thank you very much. I truly mean that as a taxpayer and as a resident, that this work has been great. There's a lot of talent in Radnor, so I remember how hard you fought for this group, both of these groups, so a tremendous thank you.
Well, thanks again for your work, and thank you in advance for your continuing work, and thanks to staff, because you're the ones who are going to have to digest this to make recommendations to the commissioners, and we're looking forward to working with you on that.
Bill, I have one announcement, not related.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, just because it's so close, that on Thursday at the Valley Forge Military College, they're having a dedication, and wreaths are going to be placed in the chapel to remember those who served and to honor their sacrifices and teach the younger generations about the high cost of freedom. The wreaths are donated, and eventually these wreaths get collected. There's a group called Wreaths Across America, and those wreaths will end up in at our National Military Cemetery at Arlington, and the expectation is in excess of 10,000 wreaths will be set on the tombs down there. The mission of that group is recounted as remember, honor, and teach. Remember the fallen, honor those who serve, and teach the children the value of freedom. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes, I'll move. We adjourn.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Passes 6-0. Thank you all.